Yeah.
either already knew what I was talking about or probably weren't going to apply it in their, somewhere outside of the meetup. Which is kind of what I think what I said in that, that email or whatever. But, that's why I thought WordPress or something like that, or like kind of what we're doing now, where like, something that's approaching a lot of people, especially with more businesses wanting to have an online presence or whatever it is. Everybody wanting to have an online presence since they can't connect in person.
Yeah. I mean, it might be the sort of thing where even if we don't have the physical space that makes sense to host, maybe we can like subsidize you guys for like buy you guys a pizza somewhere or something,
Yeah.
at a more, because let's face it, it's summer, it's as hot as it is nice out, and the tech hub just isn't the tech hub without a whole lot of the people that used to have offices there. So
yeah,
if it can be something more amorphous, where the great Nevada County Media has phenomenal event space. There's the back room at Grass Valley Brewing. There's places to have meetups. They don't have to.
And a lot of cafes, cafe, copy and code is a common thing with tech people.
Exactly, and I mean something like that could be the way to do it moving forward.
Yeah,
because I just don't know what the long-term plans for that space is.
Well, I mean, so is even NC Tech at this point relative?
Yes. The real question is, like, are we going to be bringing people into that space?
Yeah.
And I just don't know.
Yeah.
I think it sounds like the way things are going as far as reopening, probably, but I can't make that decision. So we'll keep everyone tuned and see what we can do. But I think I'm about there as far as getting the YouTube embedded. I'm gonna go ahead and turn on
Cool.
the Facebook streams here, share them to some groups, and then we'll get rolling here in just a second.
Andreas is here too. Is there a chat on this thing?
Let's see.
Just curious.
Yeah, cool. Yes.
I see it.
Okay. There we go.
No, I hardly zoom. Sorry.
There we go.
I haven't been Slack. I took it off my phone. There was just no activity, and then I check it through my computer, and I haven't been on my computer as much recently.
Slack is one of those slippery slopes. It's.
I wasn't using it. It was on my phone, taking up space, and I was like, yeah. But I do need to probably check it more often when I'm on
my All right, share it to a couple
more.
more.
I've been using Whereby when I do video conferencing, because I could, I'm only like 4 people or whatever. And it's a screen share of me and another person. Whereby.
All right.
Yeah, Whereby. It's free and it's unlimited time. And you can have your own, like, you can give it to a browser, so it's in browser. There's no downloading of it software. Sorry. Okay, go ahead, David.
All right, I think we're gonna get started here. Let's see. Make sure I've got going recording. All right. Hello, Nevada County. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm David Clark Carroll with the Nevada County Tech Connection. We've got another web development workshop with Ethan Hunter. Real pleased to have these back and going. We've even got someone hanging out on on the chat here tonight. So real exciting to have some activity back here. Without further much ado, I'll let Ethan jump right into it.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna go ahead and screen share, I guess. Okay. Can you see that screen share?
Looks good.
Okay, great. All right, so yes, my name is Ethan Hunter, as some of you may know. And we've been giving this talk for a while, and we're on a series of talks. We've done a couple already, color and others. So tonight we're going to be talking about topography, and basically these talks have been about kind of just giving you an overall of how you should approach the visual side or the design side of your website. We call it a style sheet. So been doing that just to kind of break it up apart before we maybe introduce everyone to a style sheet. So tonight we're going to talk about topography, and topography is kind of a big deal in web design, and mainly because topography is probably about 95% of the information on the web is in the form of written language. So basically, majority of what we're seeing on a website or our phone or whatever is text, and so it's a pretty important part of design. And so yeah, basically topography is the use of text in design, and a lot of times people will refer to it as typeface or fonts even, and I think typically you'll hear fonts used a lot in web design. And obviously fonts play a vital role in conveying your message, from not only giving you the information but also creating a visual aesthetic or some sort of appeal or whatever to the text you're using. Okay, so that's topography. So let's jump into what I would consider types. Now, there's a lot of different people who have different opinions about that. But so basically, I've broken it down to what I consider these 4 or 5 main different font types. So we have what we call the serif font. And you can see the serif font has like these little bit of tails to them at the edge or the end of the lettering. And so that would what we would classify as serif. So it's a little bit fancier. A lot of times you'll see it. It's going to be used traditionally like in print, magazines, newspapers, books, things like that. You'll see that is a very common. It's very classic, old-fashioned, probably basically dating back to the early printing presses of like Gutenberg. So that's one font type. The next font type is sans serif. And you can see it's fairly similar to serif, but it's sans, so it's without. And basically what that means is there is no fancy tail to it. You can see there are no, it's just very more of a blocky or stick kind of font. And that is probably what we would consider more of a modern font, and you'll see that being used more in web design than say serif, because serif in many ways is really hard to read, especially when you start getting into smaller font sizes. The smaller the text, the harder it is for it to like, be read with serif because of the little tails and stuff. So that's basically what sans serif is. Slab is a type of serif font, and you can see it's a little heavier. It's got a little bit more meat to it. It's a little blockier. So the kind of, the tails or whatever we refer to that you see, they're very more angular and things like that. So that would be another type of font. The next one, so these ones I'll call like display, but display is actually kind of be its own font, but basically it's anything like super creative. So you've got script or cursive or handwriting or inline, even graphic. Like I don't have one up here, but you'll see like, when you're watching or like a Halloween poster or whatever. It's got like the blood dripping down of the text and things like that. So that's something we would consider to be like graphic. And then of course there is what we call modern. Now modern isn't up here, but think Art Deco. So that is more something that's kind of like turn of the century. It's typically a very tall font, not very wide. It's more stick figure, but it does have sometimes will have a little bit of tails to it, like the regular serif font. So that would be the other one. So, and then, you know, something to consider in a type actually of fonts is, you know, each font can have its own weight. So we can see even a variation in the same font, how what a thin, a light, a regular, a medium, or a bold may look. And so that in itself is almost its own type, or something to think about when you're choosing font types. What does it look like in a thin, or what does it look like in a bold? And also font width. Some fonts are very squished together. You know, they don't have as much spacing between the letters. Some are a little bit more spaced out, and then some are really stretched out. And, you know, of course, especially with weights and font widths, you can add that into like CSS and things like that into code itself, and kind of move and expand things as well. Also kind of some of your plug and play like content management systems will have those abilities to kind of change your weights or your widths. Okay, so that's kind of the types or the who's of fonts. All right, so let's talk about like readability and selection. Okay, I don't have every different example up here, so I'll probably just be kind of going through some of these really quick. But so the first most important thing in web design is keep it simple. All right, don't get it really complex. Don't choose a bunch of fonts. Sometimes it's really important to use like system fonts for text. So the ones that we're typically used to, that you'll find in most PCs or most word processing, those will be called system fonts typically. And those are a really good place to start when you're looking for font selection in your design, because of readability. Basically, we're used to reading them. Obviously, like I said, keep the number of fonts used to a minimum, like limit them to 2 or 3. Remember going back to the previous one, you know, we have 2 or 3 fonts, but we also have font weights and font widths. So in that in and of itself, there's a little bit of, you know, variation that we can use. So, all right, so keep in mind that good typography draws the reader's content in to the content. It's not drawing them into what the type itself looks like, the typeface, the font, how cool it is. I mean, maybe, you know, like Coca-Cola, they've got a great one, so, you know, that's a script, and maybe that would be a choice there. But for the most part, when you're making choices for typography, you're really just trying to make it visually pleasing to the person so that they can read the content, the information that you're trying to give them. Also, another one is to limit line length. So you can see that up here on the top left of the design here. You want to make sure that you limit your line length and your spacing. Use proper white spacing. So that would be, you know, the spacing in between the fonts, or, you know, the text itself. A lot of times a really good rule of thumb is to be not too close, you know, together, obviously. So, you know, you can see this below 40, that's just too close. Around 50 or 60, it's really nice. Getting out to 90, it's really hard to read. People aren't going to be as engaged. So I think that's really important when you're, you know, putting content on the page, you know, not only, but think about that space, the length of the content per column, your spacing, your line height. Typically, we would say 50 to 80 characters is a good place to be for line length, or, you know, paragraph length, really. So also choose a typeface that works well in various sizes. So that's something we talked about again, where serif is really hard to see because it's so fancy looking. It's probably not the best to use, especially when you're just trying to put out content. Might be good for a header or something else like that, but not necessarily good for actually reading readable content. And then also another one that's really important is to use fonts that have distinguishable letters. And so what do I mean? Like, you know, there's a 1, and if you do a lowercase l, they can look really similar. You know, a B and a D can look similar to certain people, especially those with accessibility issues like dyslexia, things like that. So really think about when you're choosing your typeface, your font selection, your readability, make sure that those letters can be distinguishable, because it can be hard for some people. Again, line height matters, so that's the height of the font. The line length, that's the width of your content. Line spacing, that's how much spacing is going to be between each you know, usually there's a little bit of space you can see here where it says good, too much, and too tight. So, you know, make sure that your line spacing is good. Getting back to having a good white balance in your fonts. Tracking is really important, so that's something to pay attention to, which is the spacing between groups of letters. So there, you know, some fonts are going to be a little bit wider spread, some are going to be a little bit shorter. And then there's kerning too, which is you'll see in some fonts where different letters space differently to each other. And that can be a real big problem for some people with disability. So, you know, or having accessibility issues. So make sure that you're finding something that is well placed throughout the different characters or the letters that you're choosing with that font. Make sure you properly match and pair fonts, and we'll get into that a little bit more later when we talk about tooling. There's some great tools out there that'll help you do that. Make sure that you have good color contrast between your background and your text. Nothing worse than having something that is just too visually jarring and you can't read it, or, you know, it's white on light gray and you can't see it. Another thing is, don't use all caps. You know, maybe occasionally when you're trying to drive home something, but in most cases, don't use all caps. Use what you were taught in school. Make proper sentences, make proper titles. Those are important. Also consider your target audience. You know, if you're going to do like Daddy's Daycare, you're probably not going to want to use the the horror Halloween font theme, you know. That's not the target audience you're looking for. So keep your target audience in mind, keep your message in mind. Some of the things that are really important also is to make sure that you're really aware of your hierarchy or the order in which your text flows. So make sure that your text is well, you know, laid out. If it's a heading, or if you're trying to send somebody in a certain direction or emphasize something that's important, make sure that your hierarchy is done well. Yeah, so that's kind of what we would say. Those are the good things that I think about when I say, you know, make sure that you're choosing something that's readable, and that'll help you inform your selection of fonts. All right, so let's talk about the psychology of fonts. All right, so there's definitely something that we feel about, you know, that's one thing that happens in design. Design's a lot about trying to convey a message, a feeling. You know, a lot of times we're trying to actually get an emotional response from the user. So it's important to consider that when you're making a selection, at least understanding how majority of people see things. Now, there are people that are going to be different, or your audience might be a little different, and the rules may not totally apply. But that being said, let's just go over them really quickly. Serif fonts will communicate things like tradition, respectability, reliability, comfort. Obviously, they're old world fonts. They're something that, you know, we feel, you know, when we see them. We've read books, things like that. They really kind of strike home that classic kind of thing. So you can see the emotions around that. Sans serif fonts will communicate like stability, cleanness, objectivity, modern, I can't say that word, modernity, Yeah, so modern, I think that we see, that's why you'll see a lot of sans serif fonts in web design today, and selection, because people are looking for something a little less classic, a little relaxed and approachable, clean, but not too like playful, like say script fonts, for example. So script fonts are, they're gonna convey like elegance, affection, creativity. Like, okay, so like how many script fonts have we seen on everybody's like marriage invitation, right? So like think of those kind of feelings, those kind of emotions, when something elegant and classic, and yet, almost, maybe even romantic, um, and think about what they feel to you. And different script fonts will convey different things. Obviously, one that's like handwritten isn't going to be like super elegant. It's going to be more playful. So display fonts, right? So that's another one where they're like these just really loud, intense, almost graphic kind of things. So we're using these almost like as images in a way. We're not, I mean, they are text and they are conveying, some sort of information to us, but they're also very visual. So they're really great for communicating things like that, and can communicate a lot of different emotions, honestly, because they are able to, they kind of create an image on their own. And then modern fonts, again, you've got strong, progressive, stylish, chic, and you'll see probably that a lot of times used in, kind of maybe that's the primary font for headers and things like that in a lot of web design. So yeah, that is kind of the psychology, and there's a lot more resources out there. A lot of people have different opinions and different ideas, and of course, you have to think about your target audience and what their psychology is too, and make sure that you make an informed choice when you're making those selections. Okay, so obviously most of my talks, if you've watched for a minute now, I typically will touch on accessibility. Accessibility, I think, is a really important thing in web design, and obviously in text is extremely important. Now, I know that there's some people that have accessibility issues. They're probably not going to read fonts. They're using a screen reader, and in that case, what I can say about fonts is, again, going back to that hierarchy, making sure that your headers are defined well, your paragraphs are defined well, so that people who are using those devices are able to easily navigate your website. So so that being said, for those who have accessibility issues but can read text, there are some things that we want to be aware of. So we want to steer away from making the text harder to read, right? So not a bunch of squished up line stuff, not a bunch of really graphic-y stuff, something probably modern, very clean, very simple. Excuse me. We want to also make sure that we can distinguish between shapes and different letters and characters. That's really important. What we don't want to do is slow down the speed of the reader. So, keeping that line height for their paragraph length, is really important. And then also never overlapping letters and characters and things like that, making things indistinguishable from one another. Those are things that we're trying to do when we're looking for accessibility to people who are using our website with text and fonts. So another one, we talked about this last time, avoid red and green. Avoid red and green on text for people who are colorblind. That can be a serious problem. Make sure that there's proper contrast. Again, we talked about making sure your background is good, and the text in the background are nice. And I remember I touched on using a couple tools in last week. So look at that video, and or just say, contrast checkers, web development, web design, and that'll help you. Make sure, again, like I said, I'll hit this home, distinguishable letters like 1 and L or B and D or Q and P. really for people who are dyslexic, it's really important that these letters look distinguishable. You know, they don't look like something else, because that really is hard for those people. Size matters, really important thing. So you know, for the ADA, they have a bunch of guidelines, and I don't have the link, but if you just Google it, they'll tell you everything, and they have a section for fonts. One of the main things that they really stress in web design for font use is size. And what I mean by size, not necessarily is like, is it big enough or is it small enough, but really, is it scalable? So a lot of times we'll have the option of choosing a pixel, and that might be a great option, but not always, and definitely not for responsive design, and also not for those people who are trying to maybe zoom in and zoom out of text, or they have some sort of device that's helping them do that. So you're actually better in using units instead of pixels. Use EM or REM, and I'm not going to go into that. You can look it up, but they're basically scalable units, and they allow for people who need to have an easy way of blowing up text to be able to see that. So another one is avoid script or handwritten Comic Sans or anything like that for your body text. Don't do it. You know, it should not be, when you're just giving them, if you want to say like a nice title, or you're trying to draw attention, you know, okay, that's fine. But when you're actually just got paragraphs, do not use anything like that. You know, even stay away from serif if you can, because it's important. And I hope I'm saying that right. Also, again, make sure, especially for accessibility people, that your line lengths are not over 80 and not too short. Line length is really important to help the reader stay engaged, especially if they have a certain amount of disability. And could you imagine if you blew up something on the text and you were trying to read something that was past 80 letters? It'd be ridiculous, right? Like, you know, that person would be scrolling left to right for days, and you probably, at the most, you're going to lose their interest, you know, even if they're used to navigating a little bit of that. Again, maintain your hierarchy in your headers. I think that's really important to stress. In fact, that's the first thing when you're trying to do some ADA compliant stuff. Will probably get flagged if you do any kind of checkers or things like that, because they're going to look for that immediately, making sure your header 1, header 2, header 3 to flow to a paragraph are all defined properly. And obviously, I think this is something that should probably go without being said, but avoid animated text. Just not great. And it's not great. Not only I think is poor web design, but I actually think that it's really bad for people with accessibility issues. Even using it italicized, and I know people like to do it, especially when they're trying to drive home something in content or bold, might be a better option. Sometimes I think just a color variation in that text, as long as you have good contrast between your background, is probably a better way to go about that than italicizing things. Also, don't use underlining unless it's a link, just because people are typically associating with that, and it's hard for people to sometimes discern. Like I said, the ADA standards are online, so do your research. Make sure all your documents are pretty much in the same fonts, and know that it's ongoing. Especially when it comes to accessibility. There is no quick fix. There's just knowing good practice and always applying it to your website. Okay, so that is we talked on most of the stuff that is about selection. So let's talk about the resources that I use. And there's plenty out there. So anybody wants to chime in, feel free. I can't read the chat right now, but I'll look at it towards the end. So let's talk about the different resources. Okay, so the number one resource, and this is even through research, but I would say, is Google Fonts. Google Fonts is awesome. It has, well, let's open it up. If it'll open up. Maybe not. I always love stuff on the fly. All right, well, let's see if it opens up here in a second. So my internet might be really slow today. So, which is a bummer. Okay, so Google Fonts is awesome. So Google Fonts will allow you to have good web compatibility. So they have a bunch of fonts out there that we know work well on the web, that many different browsers and many different devices don't have a problem with. They're supported by Google, so you can reference that and it'll go right there to Google itself. Google Font also has great pairing. So that's what I wanted to show you, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to be loading. A lot of times with Google Fonts, you like, hey, I like this font. It looks great for my header. And they'll also give you the options to they'll give you different choices in which to pair things that are visually appealing and go well with each other. And I think that that's really important because not only are you getting a bunch of free fonts that we know are web compatible, but there's also a great tool in there that will actually show you different fonts that you can pair with. And it also show you different font, like what we talked about earlier, weights and spacing and things like that. So it's a great place to do that. All right, so this isn't working. Let's see if the next link works. Font space. Yeah, unfortunately, it looks like my internet provider is being quite slow right now. All right, so this is the one that I like to use, and unfortunately, I can't show it to you, but I use this a lot, not for web design, but I actually use this for graphic design. So when I'm making t-shirts or hats or things like that, this is a great place where you can buy fonts, but they also have a lot of what we call open source, Creative Commons, free to use, commercial use fonts. And I like those a lot, especially when I'm looking for something that is more decorative, not your classic fonts that you would use for regular text in a website. So that is also an important tool that I use. I have used Wet Font. I don't have it on my Google Chrome now, but I didn't link it because it was going to be too much. But it's a great font tool to use on your browser. It's an extension that you add to Google Chrome, and it'll pretty much allow you to, if you see a font on a website and you can't figure out what it is, it's a good way to figure that out. And there also is another website that will have where you can kind of take a screenshot of something and go to the browser and get on the website. And I think it's called What the Font. And that one will allow you to figure out what font it is that you're looking at. So that's also cool. And one I haven't used, but a lot of people are using it, so I think I'm actually going to try to check it out, is I think they're calling it Adobe Edge, but really the link is fontsadobe.com. And they also have a bunch of free fonts. And of course, it's Adobe, so I'm sure they have, spend lots of money fonts. But overall, I found Adobe products to be pretty good. And so I thought that this was definitely a mentionable one in that. Okay, so unfortunately, I couldn't show you. Please do check these out. Pause the screen, save it so that you can find these links here. Definitely check out Font Google. I think that one's, if you're just starting and you're trying to figure out a font, that's a great place to start. A lot of great choices, and you'll get a lot of inspiration from that. So, okay, well, that is the end of my talk. And I just wanted, and I didn't put it up here, but this is Nevada County Web Development. We're kind of doing this thing online right now. And we might be doing some in-person meetups again too. But right now what we are doing is the fourth Thursday of every month at 6 p.m. David's been super awesome and getting all this together for us and getting the links and the streams and all the awareness and the promotion out there for us. So make sure you're tuning into that. And next week we will be talking about images and what they mean in selecting for web design as we slowly knock out these topics to talk about a style sheet. All right, so I'm Ethan Hunter of hillbilly.io. That's HILLBILL.io. And I do some mostly WordPress web development. And if you're interested, give me a shout out. Thanks, David.
Hey, thanks so much for doing this for us, man. And I just want to make sure everyone out there knows, if you don't think font choices are important, go down the rabbit hole of Googling bad font choices.
Absolutely. I wanted to bring some, but I wasn't sure how appropriate they would be.
Yeah, it's one of those, it's a rabbit hole for sure. Don't do it on a work computer and you'll have more fun. But yeah, thanks so much for leading yet another phenomenal workshop here. We'll be back next month. And any final thoughts for us here?
Oh gosh, I mean, have fun with it, and don't overcomplicate it. I think that, like, one of the things I first said was, keep it simple. Use some pretty good tools out there, and just kind of what I kind of give an overview: the psychology, the accessibility, the selections, really paying attention to what a font means in design, not just like, I'm going to put some words on there. What does that visually mean to people? And I think, that's what I would have to say in closing.
Awesome. Thanks so much for doing this.
Cool.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop the stream